resources to support your well-being. Appointments are available.
You're live. You're live. You're live.
780-7666
Internet.
or learn more at eskenazihealth.edu.
There are thousands of hurting children in Indiana. They are in the child welfare system after experiencing abuse or neglect at home.
For the folks down there in Atlanta, hey, can you mute the radio real quickly?
And some face mental health issues or confront racism. Or
for the folks down in Atlanta, we have a special show today because I have a superstar panel, and I'm talking to all our listeners down in hot Atlanta, Georgia. I watched some of the African-American males, some were from Atlanta, and they apparently did not know who the vice president was, and they were undecided voters. Well, today, especially for the folks in Atlanta, we're going to, because Georgia is a pivotal state. You've gone purple in Georgia, and we're going to need that number they were seeing 19% for Trump. Once you hear the show today, you understand why that's a critical mistake. I'm going to have experts on our panel today to discuss this issue. And so I want you to know that we're going to deal with issues that are important to you and explain to you why you need to stop this nonsense about supporting a guy who cares nothing about you, only cares about himself. So today, and I'll introduce our guests when we go live on our local station. But having said that, we had a wonderful week this week in watching the Democratic National Convention. And also, I forgot to tell you, we're a live call-in show also. You can reach us at 833-653-3529. That's 833-653-3529 for the folks down in Atlanta.
Concerns of the community. Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you for joining our show for the folks here in Indianapolis. Thank you so much. We have our superstar panel with the anchors of Attorney Milton, who started the revolution in terms of police misconduct with the Rodney King case. And our superstar from Chicago, who's going to be reporting about the Democratic Convention, Vanita, Masters in Tax and Cybersecurity expert. And today we have a special guest. We have the professor, Kevin Brown, was on the faculty of Indiana University Law School from 1987 until 2022. He was a distinguished professor now after he retired at the South Carolina Law School. He attended that law school up in the East called Yale. He graduated back in 1982. He has taught torts law, education, and most importantly, race and law. So we have one of the top experts on the planet in terms of race and law in our country. Professor Brown, how are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing fine. And certainly it's an honor to be here. And of course, Nathaniel, we've known each other for decades, and I've appreciated the work that you've done for the community for all that time. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we got our superstar panel. I know they're going to have some questions, but start off. First of all, it was devastating news this week to see the world's #1 research institution, MIT, reduce their enrollment numbers for the 24-25 incoming class. I don't remember exact numbers, like 1160 or 1170. So they went from 15% African-American enrollment down to 5%. What the heck's happened, Professor? Why are we seeing such a dramatic decrease?
Yeah, you're going to actually begin to hear about this for the next couple of months. In June of 2023, the United States Supreme Court, in a case which I'll just call the Harvard affirmative action case, struck down affirmative action. And affirmative action has been the primary way that Black applicants to selective higher education institutions. So we're talking about, your Ivy Leagues, your Indiana universities, your University of Georgia. I mean, the selective schools. And that's how our numbers have really grown, is through affirmative action. What it meant was that you got a plus in the admissions process if you were an underrepresented minority, meaning Black, Latinx, or Native American. the Supreme Court decided after 60 years that that policy violates both Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause, which was added to the Constitution in 1868. So having done that, what they have done is cut the lifeline of Black kids going to selective higher education programs. So this will be your elite undergraduate programs. It'll be it'll be all of your law schools, all of your medical schools, all of your dental schools, all of your significant MBA programs. And you're going to probably see this kind of a drop of anywhere from a third to two-thirds of Black students throughout the country at these places. And frankly, MIT was the first one. But believe me, it won't be the last. You will hear this all the way up through the election.
Attorney Banks of Brown, you have a question?
That's scary. I went to law school through the affirmative action program and probably would not have been able to go to University of California, Hastings, a school of that prestige, had it not been for the program. Because there was a recognition of certain things back in 1970. But it's been a rich program. It's been a beneficial program to a society, to Black folks. And it scares me that we're going back to the days of the past with this program and these programs, man. So what do we do about that?
Well, at this point, there's nothing we can do. What we should have done in 2016 was to have worked harder for Donald Trump not to be elected president. Because he was elected president, he got 3 justices appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So 1/3, 3 of the 9 that are up there are Trump supporters. So when you look at this affirmative action decision, all of Trump's justices were against the program. If you took those out, it was 3-3. But the problem is that they've made this a constitutional decision. So the only way that you could overturn a constitutional decision is either through amending the Constitution, which is extraordinarily difficult because it requires 2/3 of each House of Congress and 3/4 of the states, or you change the justices on the Supreme Court, who then reinterpret the Constitution the way these justices did in June of 2023. But to get more justices on the Supreme Court, at this point, you would need to support Biden's bill to change the court. Absent that, absent a significant Democratic victory this fall, where the Democrats take over both the House, Senate, and the presidency, and then pass Biden's bill to restructure the court, absent being able to do that, I don't think there's much we can do about this, quite frankly, for another 20, 30 years when you wait for a change in the court.
Attorney Banks?
Well, from my perspective, that's what's at stake in this November election. And we've got to get the word out that not only at the top of the ticket, but we have got to ensure that we are voting up and down the ticket, and we've got to be focused on those pivotal Senate and House of Representative votes or elections across the nation. And Professor Brown, I always say that the terms affirmative action, those terms were bastardized, if you will, to be construed to mean that individuals, minorities that were less qualified were attaining these spots in universities and law schools and MBA programs. But that was never the case. It was individuals who were qualified, but yet did not have the opportunity to gain access to these colleges and universities were given the opportunity through affirmative action initiatives to gain that access. The same for diversity and inclusion. And so do you believe in the Harvard decision, part of the, I don't know if you call it dicta or statement by Justice Roberts, where they talked about candidates applying to universities, that there's nothing wrong with them speaking to their individual life experience in their application, is one of the only kernels that I was able to glean from that decision. And I was hoping that you could expand on that.
Yeah, I can. There's a lot of things that you said that, let me just quickly hit a couple of them. The voting up and down the ticket for people who represent our interests is absolutely critical, not just at the president's level or the Congress level, but at the state level. When you talk about attacks on critical race theory and DEI, and people need to really understand, attacks on CRT and DEI are attacks on the Black community. That's exactly who these attacks are directed at. It will hurt Hispanic Latinos, but it will not hurt them nearly as much as it will hurt us. And everyone understands that. So at the state level, we've seen attacks on DEI programs and critical race theory where they're trying to eliminate the ability of talking about this in our public schools. And for those people who don't know what critical race theory is, simply put, it was Black scholars looking at American history and telling the story of American history from our point of view. So we looked at what America's history of racial discrimination had done to us and talked about it, which isn't typically talked about. Most people don't understand just how bad things have been in the United States. So first, I want to make that point. The second point, though, is a much more difficult one. What the Supreme Court has basically said is that, look, you cannot take account of race when it comes to admissions. It has generally been accepted by those people who admit students that standardized tests, the LSAT, the SAT, the ACT, the MCAT, the GMAT, the OMAT, all of those tests are culturally biased against Black people. We score lower on those tests, but the people who are admitting students under affirmative action knew that those tests were not legitimate means to judge our abilities. So they would systematically discount the importance of those tests. What the Supreme Court has effectively said is you cannot do that. Now, it means then when you apply, your racial information is going to not even be presented to the admissions committee. So if you're a Black student, the only way that an admissions committee is going to know that you're Black is because you've written something in your personal statement that has demonstrated that. And there will be admissions officers out there who are understanding that even though the Supreme Court has done this, we understand that the Supreme Court has simply misunderstood the entire admissions process in such a way as to hurt particularly Black applicants. So there will be admissions officers who will still consider race and recognize the need to actually take that into account, but they're only going to be able to do that if the applicant actually says it. So if there's any Black person out there who is applying to higher education, you need to include in your statement that you are African American and what you have done for the Black community. Otherwise, they just simply won't know. And because of the bias that exists in standardized tests, their test scores are simply not going to be as good as those that we get from whites and Asians. And believe me, this has a lot to do with the bias of the test. You know, I've got a whole 2-hour lecture. I could talk about bias on standardized tests, but we don't have time to cover that. But in short, I agree with you 1,000%. They need to mention that but the admissions officials are under the Supreme Court directive that you cannot take account of race. You can look at it and say, okay, this is someone who's overcome challenges. So they've demonstrated courage, dependability, commitment, drive, but they can't use the fact that they're African American or Black or Latinx as a plus.
Hey, Milton, Professor, I was concerned because I attend the University of Georgia Law School, and you know that has a history of systemic racial bigotry. In fact, it was a long time before they admitted their first African American into the University of Georgia Law School, and then with a threat of lawsuits and otherwise. But I looked at it differently, Professor. Affirmative action, in my view, of the University of Georgia was that they always had it, but you had to be wealthy, politically connected, and white. And that was affirmative action. They have affirmative access to get admission because of their connections, right? And so my concern, though, is that the football program led to the increase in African Americans on campus, right? And so my question is that what I've seen is that, are we then relegated to the point whereby they're looking more so at people activities, like, for example, the football players get admitted and they waive a lot of those admission requirements, and basketball and those money sports at the university. How does that play a role in terms of the decision?
So this won't affect your athletes. Athletes aren't admitted through the traditional application process. They go through a completely separate process. It won't impact that. But you're right to point to the connection of Black athletes and this discrimination that Black people have suffered in higher education. And remember, it wasn't just the University of Georgia Law School that discriminated against Black applicants. We were all basically excluded from selective higher education institutions all the way up into the mid-1960s. So when you're talking about Georgia first admitting someone to a law school in the 70s, that was a little after everyone else started to do it in the 60s. But in fact, one of the reasons you start to admit Black students is so you can get Black basketball players and Black football players. So you see that the increase in Black athletes playing college sports comes at the same time that they're first beginning to admit us into the colleges and universities. Beyond that, though, the overwhelming majority, so I've talked to, I don't know, thousands of people who have been interested in going to law school and applying to law school. And it was the same with the selective higher education institutions. You have all of these rankings of colleges and universities, and the rankings are tied in large part to the standardized test scores and GPAs of your students. So because of that, colleges and universities first look to standardized test scores and GPAs to determine who they're going to admit, because this determines how high they're going to be ranked. Other things like involvement in community activities, being someone who works hard, those are helpful things. But from the standpoint of the college and university, what they're trying to maximize is standardized test scores and GPA. The other things simply are not nearly as significant as a student's SAT scores or ACT scores or their GPA. They might be helpful on the margins if you're close, but most of the gaps here are going to be on those standardized test scores. And people don't understand. I mean, this is the problem. Black people in particular don't understand how biased these scores are. Now take me. I went to Yale Law School. Yale Law School was the most difficult law school in the country to get into. So when I took the law school admissions test, I scored about the top 25% of people who take it. That's way too low for Yale. But if I looked at Black students only, I was in the top 1%. That's how large the differences are. So yes, I went to Yale under affirmative action, but all of us as Black students went to Yale under affirmative action. And it's the same with probably 80, 90% of the Black students that go to law schools. They're going on affirmative action because of the bias that are built into the standardized test scores.
Professor, I don't know if it's this new coffee I'm drinking that's giving me this funny feeling in my stomach or what you're saying. Because what I read that you're saying is it's going to be dependent upon the eye of the beholder, for lack of a better phrase. It's going to be dependent upon the individual admission people at the various medical school and law schools as to how much credence they give to what we say in our application, in our personal information. But if they go by the standardized test scores and grades as they've done traditionally, or no, they haven't, but they say they have, we're going to see the same fall or similar fall as Nate pointed out at MIT across the country.
You're exactly right. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Scary. That's scary to me for some reason.
Believe me, I understand as a law professor, because you can imagine how many Black law students I'm going to lose because of this decision. But yes, you're exactly right. That is exactly what I'm saying, is it's going to depend on those people who say, hey, look, I'm in this position. I'm going to admit the best people, I think, looking at everything, and race may be part of it. Now, here's one of the funny things, and this is something that Attorney Lee knows very well. It is very difficult in our legal system to prove race discrimination if someone doesn't come forward and say, I am discriminating because of race, right? It is difficult because you've got to prove that the person who is discriminating against you is doing it because of race, as opposed to all of these other reasons that they could give. So when we as Black people get victimized by race discriminations, we find it's difficult to win in the legal system. This is what would work in our favor for those admissions officials who say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and admit the best class I think of students possible, and I, in fact, think race has played into it. You'd have to prove that person admitted someone because they were Black, and that's going to be a very difficult thing for them to do if the person who does the admissions doesn't actually say, hey, I'm admitting someone because they're Black. And this is why there hasn't been as much conversation about this issue to this point, because those of us who are sitting there thinking, well, if I'm in the position of making a decision, I'm not going to actually say I'm going to give positive considerations because someone's Black. I'm just going to do it. Because if I say it, now that becomes evidence of my being racially discriminatory, which makes it easy for someone to prove I discriminated against the white applicant who didn't get admitted. And let me I just want to jump on one other thing, though. This decision's not going to help very many more white people get admitted. The primary beneficiaries of this are going to be Asians, not whites, but Asians. And you see this even with MIT. The percentage of Asians in MIT, let me say this again, goes from 41% to 47%, whereas the percentage of whites went from 37% to 38%. So where you saw a 10% drop by Black students, you saw a 6% rise in Asian students and a 1% rise in white students. And that's what you're going to mostly see, is that the largest beneficiaries are going to be Asians.
You know, I've forgotten the facts of Baki, but I'm thinking about what are the facts of Baki that I want to remember for this conversation. But comes along an Asian student who says, I think a Black person has my seat. I'm going to file a lawsuit because I think they're discriminating against me. Is that a possibility?
It's going to be difficult now for the white student. Well, first off, now that we're no longer under affirmative action, right? Bakke was the decision that said to colleges and universities, you can consider race and ethnicity in the admissions process. So this decision is saying you cannot do that. So the white person who was suing against affirmative action and the decisions the Supreme Court made in June of 2023 was in a situation where the university is saying we give positive consideration to someone because of race. Now they can't say that. And you won't hear any admissions official any place in the country say we give positive considerations for someone because of race. They may actually do it, but they won't say that they're going to do it. Because if they say they're going to do it, then what they're doing is creating evidence that will be used by conservative groups to attack them in this post-affirmative action era.
And Bakke stood for the proposition that race could be used as a factor among several factors, but could not, that quotas were not permissible, but that race could be used as one of a number of factors. Since the Harvard case, I've been looking at where do we go from here? And one of the documents that I've been focused on, because I think it is a playbook, if you will, or it's guidance from the Department of Justice. It was issued in August 2023 after the Harvard and University of North Carolina decision, and it's questions and answers regarding the decision. And it states that, and we referenced in this call earlier, Professor Brown, that the court made clear that nothing in its opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. The Department of Justice questions and answers also states that institutions of higher learning can continue to take other steps to achieve the goal of a diverse student applicant pool and a diverse student body. They can do that through pathway programs that are not prohibited by this decision, where they can look at geographic residency, they can look at financial means. Back when I was going to law school, it was referred to as they can look at socioeconomic or socioeconomic disadvantage status. They can look at all those kinds of things to achieve the goal of promoting a diverse student body. So I've been trying to look at, in the aftermath of the decision, what is still legal for universities and colleges to pursue. And I believe that the Department of Justice questions and answers, and I'll try to put a link in the chat box for everyone to have access to that.
Let me say, and I think you make a lot of really, really great points there. And so the first point, though, you're talking about a Department of Justice memorandum interpreting this decision from the Biden administration. In other words, each administration will be able to interpret this opinion the way they want to interpret it. Biden administration and Joe Biden has made it very clear he feels a special debt and obligation to Black people because we were such a significant part of his electoral base. He is committed to us. His policies and programs have clearly reflected that, despite what the Republicans are trying to tell you. But that's a statement from the Biden administration. If the Trump administration takes over, then we really have a problem. Because you see, the Biden administration is not going to go after colleges and universities who consider race even though they're not supposed to. But a Trump administration will. As it stands right now, you only have a few private groups who are out there suing colleges and universities. If Donald Trump gets elected, then you will add to those private groups the Department of Justice. And the fact that you add the Department of Justice as suing colleges and universities will chill the ability of colleges and universities to consider race because they don't want to be sued. So if Donald Trump gets elected, a Trump administration will use this opinion far more aggressively to target those colleges and universities who are still admitting us than a Biden or, in this case, a Harris administration will. So I definitely agree with you there. Now, let's be clear on
Excellent
this.
points, Professor. Excellent points.
Yeah. Let me be clear on this, though. People have argued that the gaps on standardized tests are based on economics, and they are not.
Just one second, take it off.
It is true. In America, if you have more money, it's easier to do well in school. You can buy tutors, you can buy test preparation, you can buy additional educational resources. There's no question that if you are wealthy, you have an advantage in getting the kind of educational credentials that'll get you into these selective higher education institutions. But separate and distinct from socioeconomics is race. At every category of income, Black people do significantly less well on these tests than whites do. So if you try to just simply say, we're gonna let people in based on socioeconomics, it does very, very little for Black people. We lose almost as many people if you switch admissions to socioeconomics as if you didn't consider race at all. It's just not going to be much of a benefit to us. And believe me, everyone in academic admissions knows this, and we've known this for at least 20 years. So yes, as I said, I come back to this. If you are applying, you need to let people know that you're Black. They can't take account of the fact that you're Black, but hey, I was head of the local NAACP in my school, or I volunteered in my neighborhood to help other Black people. What you're showing is a commitment to the community, determination, a willingness to get things done. Admissions officials can credit that, but they can't credit the race. But they can overcredit that if they know that you're Black.
Okay, we have one quick question from Imhotep. Imhotep got a question. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Hello.
What's your question?
Hello, Brother Nate.
How you doing today, sir? Got a question for
Brother
Professor?
Imhotep.
Yes.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me? Brother Imhotep here.
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you for your guest on Superstar Panel, Professor. Thank you. I read that MIT article the other day, and it seems to be different because I've read 5 or 6 pieces in the last 6 months after the decision, maybe the last 8, 9 months after the decision, where the Asian community has been angry because they said their numbers have been disproportionately affected negatively since the decision. You know, it was like they was giving a pig in a poke. They didn't realize that they were being sold a bill of goods. And going to the testing, we've read hundreds, I've read tens of documents and research studies on the testing. I have educators in my family. I know administrators up in the northern Indiana region who told students over the years that certain groups of people are just given answers to the test. We know this is true because you've got 5 present scandals now in Asia, Singapore, Thailand, various other countries where the testing is being done and the professors are walking around just giving them the answers. And the SAT said they can't govern what happens outside the country at the testing locations. This is a fact, people. You can look it up. This is a fact. Asian people have told me. I went to Lincoln University in Jeff City, Missouri for 2 years. And then I finished up and I came back at Purdue. I got admitted to Purdue just like that with a snap of a finger because, first of all, I was a veteran of the United States Air Force. And then probably some affirmative action may have been in there too. That was 1989 and 1990. Okay, so the point of the matter is that even their own people say that they tired of that stigma of everybody thinking they're just so smart when they're being test prepped. I'm telling you, that's what it is. Okay, it's not like it's rocket science out here. And so when you have people, and then here's another thing with that. I'm a scientist. I work in healthcare. You have to have a round view of things. What we see now in my field, we've got too many linear thinking people. So when you just have somebody that can pass a test, they can't see anything else around them. And then if something is out of what they're used to seeing from the linear scope of view, they can't figure it out. They're knocked off of it. That's a dangerous precedent they set, and it really isn't. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson said, instead of having all these SATs, written stuff, why don't we have some oral tests? He said he thinks oral tests would be a better way of actually gauging what someone may know. Now, that's from the great Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the foremost astrophysicist who said he, in his own right, wasn't considered a good student. He said this. If the definition of a good student is this, 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 and this, he said, well, I wasn't a good student then. Now, that's from Neil deGrasse Tyson. So it's just too much junk in the game. We know it's there. But I want to highlight what we...
Wait a second. Let me ask Professor something. You said something very important, Imhotep, something I've never thought about. Professor, if they did oral testing, I was just curious, is that something being used now? Would that work?
Yeah. I don't think so. First off, Imhotep, certainly my hat's off to you. Purdue is an excellent academic institution. Purdue has really prided itself on not really taking account of race in its admissions. And that's why the percentage of Black students at Purdue is like 2.5%, whereas at Indiana, it's like 4.3%. Purdue's always been harder for us to get into precisely because they don't consider race in their admissions process. So you probably were not on affirmative action going to Purdue. With respect to the issue of oral testing as opposed to written testing, colleges and universities will stay away from that purely simply because of the expense related to oral testing. But the second thing would be a concern that they would have about bias. It's a lot easier to be biased if you're seeing someone in person than if you're just looking at what they've done on a piece of paper. And it's not clear to me that would be a better way for Black people, because then it throws us into standard English skills. How do we articulate ourselves compared to how whites articulate themselves? Or
Asians would have a problem definitely with the language problem. They definitely would have that problem.
Yeah, no, Asians would clearly have a problem with that. And I look, I want to agree with you 1,000%. The reason it doesn't make sense to have all of your admittees, people who did well on a test, is because you won't have the diversity of perspectives and points of view. And that's when a society makes mistakes, is that its leaders are too narrow-minded. And this isn't the time to do it, but there's so many things that we've done in the United States that have been mistakes because of the narrow-mindedness of our governmental officials.
And wouldn't you agree, Professor? I'm sorry.
But that's what we've understood in law. We need people with broad backgrounds who can understand and negotiate with people from very different racial and ethnic groups than themselves, because the decisions that are coming out of law are decisions that are going to impact everyone. But indeed,
right. Wouldn't you agree that the testing companies, this whole thing is a money-making scheme? From all the research I've read, from Macmillan Publishing and Pearson Education and all of them. The money angle, it's definitely on there because they are mad. They got mad when a lot of schools went away from it, like with the standardized testing in the state level and stuff like that. It's a big money interest grab for them too. And I think that drives a lot of it too, because it definitely will affect their pocketbooks. But make no mistake, what we're seeing in healthcare, and you can talk to people from nurses to all the way down, we're seeing linear, thoroughbred, blinder on type people now. Whereas when I was being taught, you had to sit and solve a problem, or we were in class and you would give your explanation for this. We're not seeing it now. We're just seeing robots. That's all we're seeing. And that's what's dangerous to what, from my point of view. And I don't know how you all may see in the law. I'm not a lawyer. But if you get in the hospital, look and see how your nurse behaves. Look and see how your doctor, look and see how the person who draws your blood, do they talk to you? Do they have a rapport with you? Can they explain to you the purpose of the testing, why it's there? Do you even need it? All these different things that was taught from the old school perspective, from a well-rounded, holistic perspective, and then see what you see now. And thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I want to say, of course, from the standpoint of the testing agencies, they're going to make a tremendous amount of money from testing. There's absolutely no question about that. And of course, they've got a vested interest in continuing to do that. But why would colleges and universities use the test? They're not going to use the test simply because the testing agencies are making money. The tests are going to be doing something that they want done. And the one thing that everybody agrees on, no one even studies anymore, is the number one determinant of how well kids do in terms of academic credentials is the socioeconomic status of their parents. What our standardized tests show us time and time again is the benefits of coming from two parents who make a lot of money and who have a lot of education, because those kids have a tremendous advantage on all of our standardized tests. There was a recent study that was done that showed if you were talking about the top 1%, 30% of them will go to our top 1% educational institutions. But if you're talking about the bottom 20%, whereas the top 1%, 30% will go. When you talk about the bottom 20%, their chances are 1 in 100. So they're 30 times more likely to go to these elite educational institutions if your parents make a lot of money than if they don't. And that's what the tests really do. What the tests provide is a tremendous advantage for people who are already making a lot of money to make sure that their kids can get elite educations so that their kids can make a lot of money. And that's why we won't walk away from the test, because if we walk away from the test, what you're walking away from is the huge advantage that the wealthy people in America have over the poor people.
Professor,
Go ahead.
Professor Brown, I was just about to ask, why not eliminate the test altogether? And some universities and colleges and institutions of higher learning have.
Once again, that's a great point. They have, they were, and now they've stopped and they're reversing themselves. The reason they were moving away from the test is because they're aware of the test gaps for race and ethnicity that all of us know. And college admissions officials are, generally speaking, very highly honorable people who are really sitting there thinking, look, what is the best class of student body we can put together? And we therefore need diversity in there. So we don't really believe that these tests are accurately determining the quality and merit of the people we admit. Therefore, we're not going to pay the same attention to it when we're dealing with Black and Latinx applicants as we will when we deal with white applicants. So they know that, and they walked away from it. But now that the Supreme Court has said you can't take account of race and ethnicity, and colleges and universities know we're going to see a significant reduction in the number of Black students admitted to our selective higher education institutions, why not go back and use the test? Because our whole reason for abandoning it was for purposes of getting more Black and Latinx students here, but we're going to lose them anyway. So why abandon the test? So you've seen a number of those same universities that gave up on using tests in 2020 and 2021, beginning now to go back to them.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. I know you have other obligation, and it's good to hear from one of the foremost experts in the country on this issue. I appreciate the tremendous work you've done, particularly with critical race theories. You produced some superstars from the law schools. A lot of African Americans got you to think for their career. So thank you very much for the service you've done.
Well, I appreciate it. And coming from you, that really means a lot. I appreciate that, Nathaniel. Take care.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Now, moving forward, Attorney Banks, we talked every day this week, but she was a participant, and she's going to tell us about it. Go ahead. At one of the biggest events on the planet.
I am still extremely tired. However, it was an honor and privilege to witness history as Vice President Kamala Harris accepted the nomination as the first African American and South Asian Democratic presidential candidate. It was a nearly flawless convention, masterminded by Chair Mignon Moore, a Black woman who started her career by working on the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.'s campaign. Vice President Harris's speech on Thursday was absolutely extraordinary, and it was the culmination of a history-making convention where on Thursday evening, she spoke to 29 million Americans, and she introduced herself officially to the American people. She exuded strength. She was presidential, relatable, and funny. And importantly, she articulated a unifying vision for all Americans. And she stated very emphatically that she will be a president for all Americans. And she focused not on party, but on every American. She articulated a vision of hope, of unity, and focused on building the middle class. This convention was inclusive. It showcased all types of families. There was so much joy and electric, frenetic energy every single day. We saw in Vice President Harris's family a blended family. We saw LGBT and the disabled community. We saw families that have struggled on fertility journeys. We saw survivors of gun violence. So many American identities were showcased. Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz, they inspired me and millions of Americans with their view of a new way forward and a brighter future. And for me, attorneys Lee and Grimes, each day built to its own crescendo, and each day built on the prior day. Again, a nearly flawless convention focused on the theme of freedom. We as Americans want to be free to make our own decisions about our own lives, including our reproductive decisions. We want the freedom to be able to have our children go to school and not be shot and killed in their classrooms. There was a focus on Project 2025, and I had mentioned on one of our prior shows, colleagues, that someone should have just the book, the 995 pages, and run through certain sections and say on page 400, and that's not the page number, this is an example, Project 2025 would eliminate unions. Now, whoever would have thought of some nonsense like that, to eliminate unions in our country? Unions negotiate wages for our workers, they negotiate benefits, health and safety. So who would ever even articulate getting rid of unions? And so many of our communities are members of unions, but I could go on and on.
Attorney Banks, I got something that was very, I thought, one of the most educational things. I mean, all the speeches were great, but there was one thing that really was informative. That is the exonerated five, or the Brooklyn Five. And were you present when those young men got on the stage and talked about what Trump did to them?
I was in the room, and it was heartbreaking.
Well, tell us about that.
It was heartbreaking to hear their story when they talked about the ad that was placed, which advocated for their execution. Now, one of the members of the Central Park Five is a councilman in New York, and they're going from despair in how they were treated. I believe 41 years collective incarceration between the five of them, to triumph on that stage and in so many other ways during the convention. Just a story of tremendous sacrifice, but yet triumph. And those young men have a bright, bright future.
Yeah, but it wasn't all.
Milton,
one of the highlights of the convention.
Well, Milton can relate to this, though, Milton, because where I understand it, they basically were framed. Scientific evidence, DNA, showed that they weren't the right person. Right. They subsequently had the person who did the crime confess to the crime, and then after he confessed, after the DNA proved they were innocent, after all this forensic evidence, Donald Trump still advocated for the execution. He never apologized, never rescinded. It was just shameful.
You know, and these young men, maybe some of them are succeeding now and doing things, but I do recall one or more of them were raped in prison. They had a very torturous prison life. So it's not all shiny.
No.
Their experience. You follow me?
From the depths of despair to triumph.
Yeah.
And some of them have struggled, as you stated.
Right. But
Attorney Grimes.
I don't know how this man can get two people to follow him. I mean, he's so cruel, he's so out of step with what's good for society. It just, I don't understand it. I don't understand it.
Yeah, that was very touching, Attorney Banks, and it shows the cruelty, the lack of remorse. It showed the racial bigotry of a person running for president of the United States. It was shameful, shameful. Right. And there's no excuse for a person to advocate murdering other human beings who are innocent. And then even after he knows that they're not guilty of anything other than being African-American males, never once does he apologize.
Right.
Never once does he retract anything he did or said. He made their life a living hell.
Absolute evil.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's one of the things. But also, Attorney Banks, aren't you in the sorority that the future president's in, AKA?
Absolutely. We're so proud of our soror, Vice President Kamala Harris. There was a lot of pink and green in the house on Thursday evening. And there was a lot of white in the room as well. And so we're just so proud of her. I believe we are the first sorority that has established, and this is nonpartisan. A lot of our work is nonpartisan, but we've also established a PAC for our candidate for President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris. And of course, we'll be working hard over the next 75 days to educate, inform, activate, and mobilize to ensure that every vote is protected and counted on Election Day.
Got to get her elected.
Well, the one thing that was a central theme is that there were so many great speeches, but I think one of the best one ever was delivered by Michelle Obama.
I was thinking the same thing about the
Yeah,
job.
it was, I don't know. I don't know whether or not there were some great speeches. They were all great speeches, but I think, I don't know. I don't know what you think, but it was just such a phenomenal renditions of thing. And then right in the middle with the facial expression, Milton, you like this, a psychodrama, when she said that he might be running for a black job.
Black job, it was a killer. It was the drop the mic moment if ever I've seen one.
Phenomenal speech.
It was.
One of my favorites, if not at the top. There were so many wonderful speeches, but when she talked about the affirmative action of generational wealth,
right,
and she talked about how many of us don't have the luxury to fail forward. When she talked about gripes and grievance politics, I mean, just a historic speech, and of course, so well received by the audience. Just absolutely fantastic. And, you know, we have to remember her words, very simple: do something. And we should do something every day. And not just one thing. We got to do a lot more than just one thing this year. We got to knock on doors. We got to, you know, prepare postcards and send them to those battleground states. We have to talk to our friends. We have to make sure that everybody's registered. We've got to talk to our family members who still need to be educated about what Project 2025 means for them.
We got to get her elected.
We cannot get comfortable. We are the underdog in this race, and we can't get comfortable. And now that we've had such a wonderful week here in Chicago, and we saw Chicago at its very, very best. Thank you to the city of Chicago. Security was tremendous, but now the hard work begins.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone, my superstar panel, for participating today. We gave you some urgent reason for you to call your friends, your neighbors, and everyone else to make sure you get a plan together to make sure that everybody, you know, go out and vote. Milton, Vanita, we've always said that this is the most important election that you ever have in your lifetime.
Right.
Well, right. I think that this election could be as consequential as the one before the Civil War. You know, I think that we have these evolution of idea, we have this plan, this playbook they put in place that we're gonna have to discuss until Election Day, the Project 2025. And I think next weekend is a holiday weekend, right? Is that right, Vanita? Oh, yes. I apologize. So the 31st of August will be off because that's Labor Day weekend. So we'll be back on September the 7th. And so for all our listeners, we won't be broadcasting because of the holiday weekend, but we'll be back on September the 2nd. Any final words, counselors?
We got to get her elected. Please take your brothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors to the poll and vote.
Attorney Banks?
Our democracy is at stake. And so we all have the obligation to exercise the most fundamental right and freedom that we have in this country, which is the right to vote. Please vote.
Thank you, everyone.
And do something.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. God bless everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
God bless you. Thank you.